everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sheila Gordon. I'm the founder and president of the Interfaith Community and also the Jewish member of a Jewish-Christian marriage for many, many years. And we are very pleased to have you here with us tonight. My comrade in arms, Clay Dockery, who is our program coordinator, when he and I looked and realized that these kids were about to graduate from high school, we thought we just couldn't let them go off to college without one more obligation to us. And that's why we're also going to tape this, because we think this is a moment that we want to have on record because of the history and development of the interfaith community. This all goes back actually to my own children, back in beginning in 1987, when we tried to figure out what do you do with the children. And over time, we did things informally for my children. By the year 2003, when we were organizing this more structurally and we had an organization set up, we began to say we have to have a real curriculum for children. And lots of people pressed us in different ways, including Phyllis and some other people whom we hope will be with us tonight. And one of the first things we did was to find the one brave Jewish educator we could find to help us develop a program on the Jewish side, and that was Nechama Ben Moshe, who is here tonight, who was then a graduate student in education at Jewish Theological Seminary and is now an ordained rabbi in the Reconstructionist tradition, and has been the pioneer teacher for us. The Christian educator who worked with Nechama at that point, Gina Bria, is supposed to be here tonight, but she is not. So we hope that she will, just so that we have resources for the people who were there at the beginning. We have several of the parents, at least one parent from each of these brave kids who were the pioneers who sort of gave their children, all firstborns, right? All firstborns, the sacrifice to the new curriculum that we developed about Judaism and Christianity. And these kids were just 9 years old at the time. And so we thought, since they were the pioneers, we were really just starting out. And we wanted to hear from them before they move on and take all of this to another place, what their impressions are of having grown up with two traditions, with the programs that we offered. And they are here, Phoebe Cohen, Zoe Wolf, and Daniel Fruit. And we have Clay, just to warm you up a little bit. And you may also want to stand and see this. I haven't actually seen this myself.
It's like a bar mitzvah montage.
Oh, God. Yeah. Ooh, it's a picture of Charlie.
That's Charlie. That's your brother in the picture.
Aww.
Oh, stop it.
Oh, good Lord.
This is the cover of a Seminary. I remember that shirt. Oh, wow.
Oh, God, I
Check
remember
out
that shirt. That's not neat, is it?
Oh, wow.
Who's in the middle? Yeah. Why did I bring the shirt?
Aww.
Missed that pull-up.
That was when I had no eyebrows.
I remember that.
Those are all terrible eyebrows.
Look at you.
Like, why? Wait, Charlie just like jumped like by.
It's a horrible
That's like a
picture.
headshot.
Oh.
Wait, what's the picture?
These are from our interview.
Wait, all these pictures are mixed
Mine's
up.
all the way back there.
Nice hair. That was good.
Oh my god. Fine, Mom, you were right. I understand. Man, oh my god, that's right.
We made it. That was awesome.
Oh.
That's really great. Who made that? Who put that together?
Clay did it.
Oh, wow.
Okay, whatever. So you have a sense that there has been an evolution, at least in size, if not in hair color, right?
People
And-
make mistakes.
And so, so we want to have a conversation with Daniel and Zoe and Phoebe about growing up with two traditions, what it's meant to them, where they think they're going with it. Have some time to involve their parents and teachers and the rest of you. And so let us begin. So guys, first question. What comes to mind? What memory, one memory that you keep and will keep with you about growing up in the interfaith community? Not
A specific
Jeopardy
memory
question.
from a function, an interfaith
From
function,
a
or
function
a...
or the class or whatever. Perception, a feeling.
Okay, well, one thing that that I always remember, I guess more of a perception or a feeling, is it was really interesting. My mom was Catholic, Irish Catholic, and my dad is Jewish. And so I grew up, like, whenever I'd visit my mom's parents, I would, if it was Sunday, I would go to church with my grandmother and my grandfather, or when I visited my cousins on my mom's side, I would go to church with them if it was a Sunday. And so there was kind of always, like, a sense of, like, yeah, I understand what's going on, and I've been to this service before, but, like, I never really felt connected to it. And then at home, when it, like, for example, on the Jewish holidays, we would always go for, like, the High Holy Days and stuff. To TUJ, Temple of Universal Judaism, and the thing that I really loved about the interfaith community at first really was that the idea was it presented me with this idea that, like, you didn't need to be one or the other. So I had always kind of felt disconnected from both because I was not fully a part of either Judaism or Catholicism. I was kind of like an observer in a way. And what the classes did for me is they just educated me in both, so I felt like more of a participant in both, and I was able to, I guess the thought that really made it great for me was that, like, you didn't necessarily need to choose. Like, your identity didn't have to be, like, it's not black and white, it's not one or the other. Like, you can have a background in both, and I really that was really great for me.
Okay. It's an interesting memory of you as a very small child going to these two kinds of things from each family and maybe feeling a little confused. Either of you have something to add?
I guess kind of similarly to Daniel, one thing that sticks out in my mind, like when I just think of interfaith and my experience there, is like I remember the first day of class, I didn't really particularly want to be there. Like I wasn't quite sure what, like the point of like having to like go into these like extra classes for like religion was, and I think that one of the things that really stuck out to me that wasn't necessarily about like it was about the religions, but it was more about learning about them and being educated, and like it wasn't specifically about being drilled into your head or like having to learn something extra is about learning more about the values and the culture and like the Bible stories and the traditions, and that was, I think, one of the things that I really appreciated and that I really took away from it was how much of it you could celebrate both cultures and you could be a part of both religions like equally. And by the end of the class, like I really, really enjoyed it. So.
And you stuck with us.
Yeah.
Phoebe.
I remember when I was very, very little, and I would sit in my bunk bed with my brother below me, and the bunk bed, and my mom would, lay down, on the floor next to us, and she'd say our prayers with us, and we learned, the Lord's Prayer, and I mean, just a couple of prayers every night. But then I also remember we would, learn all the Hanukkah stuff and celebrate Passover every year, which was, my favorite holiday besides Hanukkah, because, 8 nights of presents was really cool for me. But I liked that they weren't pushing me one way or the other. They just kind of let me float and learn everything with my own kind of perspective, especially when we started the classes and I got to learn everything that I really wanted to learn. No judgment, no specific push either way.
Thank you, parents.
It was also nice. I had a lot of friends who went to Hebrew school, and it kind of seemed to be to a lot of them something that they dreaded, in a sense. And I also went to less of a Hebrew school, but more of just a kind of like a Bible story education type class that was separate from the Interfaith Community, and that was also. Although, there are some fond memories from that, it was also not something that I looked forward to, but it was really interesting being able to be part of a class that I actually wanted to go to. It's it was nice. It made me feel more a part of it rather than just somebody who's being preached at, I guess, in a sense.
Why do you think that was?
Well,
Nahama is already
yeah.
felling here. But felling.
It was a combination of just... You really weren't being lectured at. It was a conversation always, and that's one of the things that I really loved about the classes. Is it wasn't like sitting there and listening to Nahama and Gina for an hour. It was like you were talking to them for the entire class. So that was something that I really loved. It made me feel like part of my own education, which was great. And also the arts and crafts projects were fantastic. I'm not gonna lie.
That's how I ended up just thriving.
And also, I think one of the things that's kind of just intrinsic in having an interfaith class where you're treating both religions is that it would be impossible to have a class that functioned and wasn't confusing, where you just preached both religions, because they do have their places where they conflict. So instead of focusing on the places where they conflicted, instead the emphasis was more on finding the similarities and what made each of them unique and what also made them similar. And I think in that way, it became more fun, because it wasn't just about Jesus or God. It was also about the values of loving your neighbor and telling the stories, and that was nice.
Interesting. Anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. The arts and crafts were great.
I actually remember one time there was we did a story about a Good Samaritan. I don't know if you remember that one, but I'm not gonna recite the story, but I just remembered that kind of goes in line with what Zoe said. It was a lot of it was also talking about the moral structures that I guess these religions tried to uphold and create, and that was also really great, because that was something that I guess transcended belief and kind of dealt more with behavior and how to be a good human being.
What was there any aspect in which you were confused about the differences between the two? Or to put that another way, were there aspects in which you were surprised by the distinctiveness of each one?
When I was very, very young, I always thought that being Jewish meant that you were more relaxed. Just because my maternal my mom is Irish Catholic and my dad is Jewish, and my grandma was is she born again Christian? And she loves church, and she has a little thing of holy water every time she leaves the house, and does that with the holy water every time she leaves and enters the house. And I always thought that you had to do so much work if you were a Catholic, as opposed to my dad never really did a lot of stuff. Like, he didn't make us go to, like, whenever my grandma was with us, like Daniel, I would go to church with her, because then she'd, like, have so much fun with me, and we'd go to church, and I thought it was really cool, and there was bright lights and music and such. And then, like, I mean, I don't really have any paternal grandparents, so I never really went to temple or anything. I only went when I had a friend who had bat mitzvahs or bar mitzvahs. So it was an interesting comparison to me when I told my mom once, I was like, maybe I should be Jewish, and I was about 7. And she asked why, and I said, well, because it seems like there's so much less work involved. And it was an interesting experience just because I had more of an overload of one than the other at some points.
That is very interesting. I wonder if I could just ask each of the parents very quickly to say what was your initial motivation in enrolling your child in these kinds of classes, which were so experimental at the time. I remember we kind of really tried to persuade you, please enroll your kids so we can do this. Does anybody have a comment on why you did this?
I mean, I did it, we did it because, and I have to say probably I was the catalyst in our family for it. I was really...
Zoe's mother, Stacey.
Yes, I'm sorry. Was very concerned about raising them in the gray area of nothingness. I mean, we agreed that we were not necessarily going to raise them to be Catholic or Jewish, and either one of us had although my husband, Zoe's father, my husband grew up in the Catholic Church, went to Catholic school. I was more of a cultural Jew. Neither one of us, as we grew up, had a connection to our religion. But at the same time, I realized as they got older that most of the kids around us, this is very common in New York City, come from mixed families, and the kids grow up in this gray area of nothingness. They just, their parents can't choose, and they don't learn about anything. And I realized, because I didn't learn much about my religion, I didn't want that to happen to them. I really felt they needed a religious education, and that was my motivation. But it was very hard to find some place that would give them a religious education without asking them to choose between it being Christian, Catholic, or being Jewish. And I just happened to find a listing for the classes one day when I was in one of the kids' papers looking for a Saturday activity, and it was there, and I called you. And that's one of the things you talked about, was about not making choices, about really making it in that way, a neutral class. They would never ask the children. And that's one of the things I remember, one of the times you talked to the parents is, there was one class, I think, where there was a discussion that came up in the very first classes about the kids. One of the kids, maybe the one who's not here, talked about having to choose or making choices between the two. And I remember when our parent briefing, we used to get these newsletters, there was a discussion about not steering the class away from that discussion, that they didn't want to have that discussion about having to make choices between the two. That it was more, and that's what appealed to me, is because they were going to get a religious education, and I feel that in many ways my children have, this is maybe saying this, but I feel in many ways they have a better religious education than their cousins who have grown up kind of indoctrinated into one religion or the other, but not really caring about it. I think they have a more holistic view, and they understand actually a lot. They know a lot about their religion. It's surprising about how much.
Phoebe's parents.
Right. Well, we, having been raised in Catholic schools most of my elementary school life, and having very conscious identity of being Catholic, when Phoebe was born and we had decided not to do anything, not to have one religion or the other, and it was a conscious decision, I felt that she was losing out on something that enriched my life. And it didn't necessarily mean that I wanted to raise her Catholic. What it meant was I wanted to raise her with a spirituality and an identity. And I felt that we were floundering when she was a little kid, that we didn't have a place or a space for her to be where she could be with other children of like identity. And so coming from this very strong Catholic background, but not really caring so much about the Catholicism or even the Christianity, it was more about a community, I think. And I looked for a long time. You know, at that time, Google didn't really exist, so you couldn't really
Right.
Google anything.
Right.
But I looked in the phone book, and I did search on computers, and I searched Interfaith, and I was looking for actually a couple of years. And when she was, I think, 3.5 or 4, just before Charlie was born, I saw a flyer for your group at our preschool and called you. And I think my impetus was that my child would be raised with children like her, and that she would have a community, and that was the beginning of it. And the idea of the classes, to me, was a great way of spanning what historically I think is a barrier between Christians and Jews, which is there actually is so much commonality, and exposing them to that. And exposing her to that, and by having her go to these classes, which I thought was a great idea, you're basically saying, okay, here's what the Christians do, and here's what the Jews do, and here's our common ground, and our common humanity. And for my children, when they're asked what they are now as, you know, teenagers, or even when they
That's
were
their
little,
line.
they were very proud. They said, well, I'm interfaith. And then they'd have to explain what that meant, because other kids didn't get it, but they're very proud to say that that's who they are. And I just feel like we accomplished a lot by giving them that kind of identity.
We've had 2 of our special guests come in right now. One is Gina Bria, who was the Christian partner in crime with Nahama back in those days, and they're just grinning at all of her kids.
They're tall.
So tall. And Michael, will maybe hear from you later, and Daniel's mother, Mary Ann Doyle, is here. Would either one of you like to comment very briefly about why you enrolled your kids to begin with?
Again, echoing the sentiments of Stacy and Phyllis, I was in a search. I was the catalyst, and I was more the catalyst, and I was in a search for something that would not require that we kind of made a commitment to one faith. Neither at our stages of life as parents, we individually were not devoted to our faiths at all. But at least I didn't feel like my son should grow up nothing, because there could come a time when he'd want to look back and be grounded, and it'd be too late. There'd be nothing touching the floor. And so I kept watching Dovetail by the month, and finally, you know, you appeared in the Dovetail resources list.
Right, pre Google and
Right.
faith, as all it was. Well, back to our the center of the evening for right now. At least one of your parents has decided to tell what you think your identity is, but I'd like to hear you tell us at this point in your life how you do describe your current religious identity. Not for the future and not for the past, but now. Who would like to start?
I guess I can start.
Hmm?
I'll
Go,
start,
Zoe.
yeah. So, I mean, basically when people ask me, I say I'm half Jewish, half Christian, because that's the easiest way to describe it. And of course, I'm always met with, you can't be half Jewish, half Christian. That doesn't work. Oh, your mom's Jewish, that means you're Jewish. And I just am like, no, it does work like that, and I can be both religions. Yeah, a lot of people don't get it, but that's how, because I believe, I mean, I don't necessarily, like, I'm not super, like, I don't super, like, believe in, I'm not, like, devoted to one religion or the other. I still, like, believe in both of them, and I still identify with both of them, especially, and I especially identify with both of them culturally.
Culturally, very interesting. And just one quick question maybe afterward is this a different impression than when you were 9 years old and you started in this program? Do you think that it changed along the way?
I think when I started, I think, I can't remember, but I'm sure I did identify as half Jewish, half Christian as well, but it was for a different reason. It was like, oh, I celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. But now it's like, I actually, like, celebrate both religions, and it's much more of an identity.
Phoebe or Daniel?
Do you want to go?
Do you want-
Okay.
Phoebe, why don't you? 'Cause-
As my mother likes to speak for me, although she was true, although most of the times when she does it is true, she says that I do identify myself as interfaith, and when people ask, I do say I'm half and half. I actually just say half and half. I don't say Jewish and Christian to see if they'll actually be curious enough to ask the other question, what does half and half mean? When they do, I do say I'm half Jewish and half Christian. And I don't really get the reaction that Zoe gets, that it sounds very violent, but I do get, how does that work? They're very, I mean, people think that, they're very conflicting religions, even though they're so similar. And a lot of the people ask, your name is Cohen, why aren't you Jewish? But I do think of myself as very evenly split between the both religions because, I mean, honestly, being myself, I have a very hard time choosing anything, let alone a religion to follow for the rest of my life. So I think the fact that I don't really have to choose is very pleasant to me, and I like being Jewish and I like being Christian. I like celebrating both holidays and humoring both sides of my family when it's time to like say prayers or do things. And I don't know, I like being, especially since most of my family, my cousins and stuff, they're all Jewish. I'm Catholic, and I don't really have any Jewish cousins or anything like that. So when I have that little bit of different part of myself as a part to all my other extended family, it's interesting to me. And when I was 9, which was, by the way, half of our lives ago, since we're all 18 now, I mean, I honestly just thought about presents, but now that the presents have kind of stopped coming as much, I got to see, well, yeah, you know what I mean. But I see the more interesting side of religion, and that people do actually study religion and, learn about this so much more into adulthood. And I like that I can learn both and be evenly divided and not really have any bias, because that's what I learned from you guys.
And do you think, just quickly, sort of, do you think that what you're talking about, where you ended up, is very different from when you were half your life away, when you were 9 years old?
I'm so old. I mean, clearly I'm much more adult than I was when I was 9, so I think I have much more of a perspective on religion now. But, I mean...
You think it was sort of fairly similar in terms of
I think that...
9-year-old?
Yeah, I think my 9-year-old self kind of had it right. Why choose?
Daniel?
Okay, I'm a bit of a departure from Zoe and Phoebe. I was bar mitzvahed. And when people ask, I guess I say I'm an Irish Jew, just for shock factor. But I think I always felt a little bit more connected to Judaism, just because the only time I would really go to church would be when I visited my mother's side of the family, whereas at home was when I went to synagogue with my mom and dad during the high holy days. And so that was just more of something that was like more regular and more of a routine for me. And so, I mean, I never did feel that I needed to make a decision or, choose or anything like that. But it's just a choice that I made because of what I identified with, and really is a matter of tradition. I mean, my father's father was bar mitzvahed, my father was bar mitzvahed, and I wanted to be as well. And, that goes back for a very long time. And that doesn't mean that I feel any less connected to Christian culture. That's really what this class did for me, is it gave me a grounding in both cultures and in both traditions. And I'm really glad that I have that, because I to a certain extent, I understand both. And I guess what I did with religion is I broke it down into 3 parts. I guess there's the belief, there are the moral codes, and there's the tradition and culture, I guess, is what I would call the 3rd part. And so I feel today, I kind of feel I feel like a part of 2 of those 3, for both religions, I guess I could say, and that is the tradition, the culture, and the moral codes, the ethical codes. I don't believe in God personally. That's just my own belief system. But I do feel that, like, I still am a Jew, and I still feel a connection to Catholicism, Christianity, and I don't think you necessarily need to believe to be a part of a religion. I think there's more to it than that, and I think that that was something that the class did for me. Is it made it less about like, well, do you believe or do you not? Because that's what we need to figure out, and it really taught me about the history and about the lessons, and that's really what made it interesting for me, and that's really what made me want to be part of Judaism and Christianity in the end. So.
Let's turn for a minute to our teachers and ask you, now that you've heard some of what the kids have to say, what did you think you were doing in designing this brave new curriculum for us? And is this the outcome that you expected? Whoever would like to speak first, or not at all? Or answer a different question, if you'd rather?
I think the outcome has been amazing, by the way. It's really wonderful to hear you guys talking about it. I think when I used to, so I was sort of preaching IFC philosophy during meetings with couples who were thinking about having children but didn't know for sure what they were going to do, and I came in as the voice of it can be okay for having kids, and that we were doing these classes and there were kids who were living this life and that they were doing okay, and that we had this philosophy in our that I think informed a lot of the teaching, which was that Judaism and Christianity were separate and distinct and unique religions from each other, and that you could be educated about both of them, and that no matter what level of education you got, whether it was all Jewish, all Christian, a little bit of Jewish and a little bit of Christian, a tiny little bit or a massive amount, that there was no way to dictate how these children were going to identify by the way that you educated them. And you couldn't predict what faith journeys these kids were on at any point in time in their lives. Like that they were going to be on a journey of faith that was going to bring them to whatever destination it brought them to, whether you believe that God brings them to that destination or that they bring themselves to whatever place they come to, that we were going to hopefully educate them so that they could have tools to take on that journey, but that we weren't dictating the path. And I think that that's a lot of what I hear when you guys are talking about where you are and where you're going and how you identify and how you do have to be out there in the world saying, well, I grew up doing things a little bit differently. And I think it's really comforting also to hear that you guys feel like you have a strong grounding in faith and in both Judaism and Christianity, because one of the things we worried about from the outside was, were we going to be doing enough? Or was it going to be a drop in a bucket that wasn't even going to really matter, and that it wasn't going to be sufficient to be a real religious education because your friends that despise going to Hebrew school are going 30 weeks a year, and we only had you for 10 weeks a year. And so what could we possibly do in this short period of time that would amount to being an authentic religious education? And I think that it sounds like getting the space and the quality that we were giving you was more important than the quantity or the direction specifically that we took things. One of the things I remembered, I love that you brought up the Good Samaritan story, because I actually do remember.
Okay, you do, great, yeah.
Were you here when he was talking about that? He was talking about, I think you hadn't walked in yet, but he was talking about how one of the things he remembered was learning the story of the Good Samaritan. And I think one of the things I remember is when we were teaching that story, both sort of being like, oh, you're this person in the story, and I'm this person in the story, and how are people looking at the story, and how were we identifying with the people in the story, and with what it meant to be a Jew in the Good Samaritan story, and what it means to be a Christian in the Good Samaritan story, and the fact that the person you know, in the story is a Samaritan, you know, like there were all these different identities that were going on at the same time, and what was it saying about identity, and how you can get too caught up in following the rules in a certain way that makes you forget to be a decent human being.
Exactly.
And like, so for us to be able to have that lens in teaching that story, I think like made it a great example of like a memorable way of being able to teach and the advantages you got from having both of us in the room together, sort of. I think the first time I learned that story was when we were sitting there learning it together, or when we were writing the piece for the curriculum. You know, it wasn't something that was, like, I'd heard about Good Samaritans, but I didn't really know the story. So you got to see us learning from each other too, and how that changed us and helped us grow as teachers and as learners, which is pretty amazing.
Stacy?
Well, you know, just because it dawned on me when you were talking about the class and about how much in 10 weeks can you learn and take away, and I think that part of it was learning it, and then in conjunction with the classes weren't just something they went to do in that end. The kids that really stuck with it and I think got a lot out of it were the families that went to the classes and then came and joined the community and came to the services, and as a family embraced the idea that we were of different faiths, because I learned, first of all, I learned things about Judaism that I never knew as an adult. I mean, I just learned about Judaism, and I also learned about Christianity. And I think it was that it was a holistic process as opposed to it's something separate. It was classes, and then it didn't tie back in. And I do think if we look at who's still here, and even some of the kids who kind of come in and out, it is the families that really took more part as a whole.
That's
in the
excellent.
community.
Excellent. Gina, do you want to come in from the
What was the
Christian
question?
educators?
Tell me the question again.
Yes, I don't know what was the question. Is this what, when you agreed to work with Nakama and develop this curriculum?
So far surpasses.
And did you know, we all do things with such intention, and we think we're going to accomplish what we set out to do, and sometimes there are unintended consequences, sometimes things happen in a completely different way, and so we're kind of looking at something, we're looking at an experiment that we started, and you two wrote the curriculum in 2003, and here we are, you know, 8-9 years later. Is this what you were working toward, and how was it different?
Well, I remember, you know, we would sit at these big tables and we'd have all this material and we'd think, how can we possibly, you know, wade through all this? What are we going to do? I mean, it was just like a very challenging, but in the end, it became pretty clear. It wasn't really that hard to understand what were the touchstones that if we just provided the beginning of these doorways to go through and to come through them both as people who were bringing the structure and the stories and the celebrations. This is what we know we have to cover. To introduce, it's an introduction. Then if we go through those doorways, we went through those doorways as writers and authors, but also really aware that we were coming to you also as authors, that you would be the authors of your souls and the authors of your traditions and the authors of your own spiritual journey, and treasuring that and guarding it and looking for the delight and the fun of coming in then through those structures of these are the lessons we really ought to touch on, and then at that moment all becoming learners together. Like, I remember learning so much. I learned so much. And it was very exciting because we'd stop the class and say, I don't know what that means, and the teachers were clearly learning. And that was the river we were on. We were all in there together as learners and as authors of our own experience in all of this, along with our families, but the sense that each of you has very distinct we wanted to stock your library. You know, we wanted to just, you wanted you to be authors who read a lot and knew a lot and had all these wonderful background voices. And we also really, really wanted to stock your imagination or ignite your imagination, the spiritual imagination, and the component of including the arts, I thought, and the jokes, arts and the jokes. Two amazing things, because we had a lot of fun and we knew we were on tender soil, and we laughed together and went forward. And having, you know, hearing what you guys are saying about, okay, you know, we're arrived. And I'm still in formation as a thinker and a believer and a cultural practitioner and a history carrier, and I know you guys are too. And again, we still are the learners in the story with you, and that's really, really wonderful. It's great. So it's amazing to see you guys.
Can I add one more? A comment that sort of leads into a question
Oh, good.
for them, which is, I don't know if you guys, how many people who are here know like what our classes are like and what we do, but in the second year that we were with these guys, we did a course that was about sacred spaces and sacred time and space, or something like that, I think it was called. But as part of it, we went to 3 different places of worship, like to a synagogue and to two different kinds of churches. So what I remember is that we were doing this whole thing about the synagogue and talking about it and talking about the prayers, all these different things, and that the only thing that you guys would focus on was that the fact that it was a bar mitzvah of 3 kids and they were all named Sam.
Oh yeah. And 2 of them were born in the same hospital at the same time.
Oh my God, I remember that.
And it was like,
That was a long service.
I
were
remember
also
at
like
the
8
time
years
being like, can we
10.
talk about anything else? Besides these 3 kids named Sam. But when I think about it
the yarmulke
now,
from
like,
that button.
right, almost 10 years later, I still remember that.
We still have the yarmulke from the bar mitzvah.
And you guys still remember it. And that one of the goals was that you would feel more comfortable being able to walk into a synagogue because you did it with us. And that maybe you didn't have, like Phoebe was saying, like didn't have like a strong background in her family about going to synagogue, like with people in her family, as like some other people might have had. And I remember the other memory was we went to the cathedral,
St. John the Divine.
St. John the Divine over there, and we were going through the whole service, and we get to this one part of the service, and they're like, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And I was like, what is going on here? That's mine. You stole it. No fair. And you guys too were like, wait, that was what we learned for the synagogue. How did that end up in here? And just like that interesting moment of having that piece to talk about. So I guess besides just sharing the like fun memories, I was curious for you guys if being part of the interfaith community, or even specifically like those classes, like how do you feel going into a synagogue or going into a church? Is it something that you feel comfortable doing? Is it something that feels hard? Is it something that like you do with family, but it's still, and especially now that you're going to be sort of going off on your own, where you might not be with your family when it's a holiday, like, and there isn't, as far as I know, IFC chapters at Albany, Barden, Wesleyan, you know, like, or anywhere close. Like, I think the closest we've got is Danbury, you know? But so you're not necessarily going to be, you know, spending Passover at the nearest interfaith community gathering. So
We can drive home for it.
What do you
Yeah,
think
actually.
you might end up feeling comfortable doing, or what might you imagine yourself doing as you sort of go off as young adults out into the world?
Those are 2 questions, and they're both great questions. Let's start with the first question, which is, when you go now into a church or a synagogue, do you feel that you have the tools to appreciate what's going on there? That's because that's what we were trying to do, right?
I mean, absolutely. I think that's what you guys did for us, is you made it not foreign and scary and something other, like even if it's not something that we were as familiar with. Like, as I said, you know, I was more often a part of the the Jewish services that I went to than going to Mass, I would say, because, you know, because I never went up for communion, and I was never confirmed, or I never had my first communion or anything. So, but I don't, like, there was a point where I stopped feeling out of place there because I was educated, and like I had been to services with you guys as well, and it just kind of clicked, and it was like, I don't need to feel like an alien here, like this is and I think, you know, that's one of the points of what you guys did. So absolutely, I totally don't feel uncomfortable. I feel like I know what's going on.
I remember we made paper doll houses of a Catholic service. Do you guys remember that? We made a little paper altar and the paper Eucharist, and then we moved them around so everybody knew when this was happening.
Yeah, exactly.
It was delightful. It was absolutely delightful.
It's like, even if it's something as like tangible and straightforward as that, like it just makes you so much more comfortable, and yeah, because you know what's going on, and that's really what's at the heart of that. And then the second part of the question was, what do you think you'll do to continue? I would say personally, I think churches and synagogues are now, because of this experience, because of the Interfaith Community, are places where I can go if I need to, not only if I feel like getting back in touch with my religion, but that I can go in times of, I won't say trouble, but if I need to think, or if I really need to, like, think about something deeply, or if I'm not sure what to do in a certain situation, they're going to be, like, they're spiritual places for me, but not just because they are churches or are synagogues, but because of the experiences I've had that have made them that. So, so yeah. So I mean, like, I love going to Mass from time to time, especially on Christmas. I love Latin Masses; those are really great. I also think I'll probably always try to go to synagogue for the High Holy Days, at least. That's something that that's a tradition that my dad has brought me up with. I mean, that's what we've done for the past however many years. I mean, for a while. I mean, yeah. And one of the things that I think my father also kind of instilled in me is a certain spirituality. On Yom Kippur, we would always go and we would meditate somewhere, and because it's the new year, you have to meditate on your actions and, like, what you've done, what you want to improve on, and that's something that you guys just built on, and so that sense of spirituality and being in touch with yourself has kind of, like, made religion for me, like, a more active, something that I'm pursuing rather than just listening to or being a passive observer. So.
I think that, yeah, you guys made church a lot less scary for me. I used to be, I mean, a lot of my cousins, we would go to, you know, their first communions. And I always wonder, I'm like, Mommy, why can't I wear that white dress and go up and do that? And she said, because we're not just Christian, we're also Jewish. And then I would look at my dad kind of apologetically, sorry. And so when everybody else would go up and take communion, whenever, like, or if we were at a wedding or something, I'd start to get up to see my cousins getting up, and I'd be like, no, sit down, you don't take communion. And I'd get so freaked out. And then after we went to church and went to the synagogue and did all that stuff, especially with the whole 3 guys named Sam thing, it made me realize I'm allowed to laugh and I'm not going to get smited or anything while in a religious place. And I was at a confirmation, I think when I was 12 or 13, of a friend of mine. And at his church, I didn't realize this, everybody was getting up for communion. And I'm like, okay, I'll sit here. And then his little sister, who is only a year younger than him, and I was friends with her, she goes, no, everybody takes communion at our church, come on. So I got up, and I was really worried that they were going to be like, you're not Christian, they'd sense it or smell it or something. And then just all of a sudden, I took the wafer and had a sip of wine, and I was like, oh, okay. And sat back down, and I was like, I've never done that before. And all my friends just kind of looked at me like, so? calm down. And then I had another friend who was he's very proud of being Jewish, and he took communion, and he kept repeating to himself, I'm Jewish. And I took communion, and he would look around. And I felt really proud of myself that I took communion at the same time, not actually having ever had a first communion. So it was an very interesting moment for me.
Did you feel that you understood enough about what communion was, what it means? Because I would imagine if I had been your age and done that, I wouldn't have had a clue. Besides the fact that I shouldn't do it.
I had no idea exactly what I was supposed to do. I was really nervous that I was going to drop the cup or something. But I just watched everybody else do it, and I felt like, I was wearing a Christian suit while I was there, and, just drank the wine and ate the wafer, and I'm just like everybody else. I don't know, I felt very adult doing that, in knowing, even though I'm not completely Christian, I can still take communion, and I know what to do, and I can still go to synagogue and, say the prayers at the right times when someone's bat mitzvah is taking place, or when I'm going to synagogue, just because it made me feel very adult.
I mean, I think personally, it's hard for me to sit here and be like, yeah, of course I feel super duper at home in a church, if I'm in a church or a synagogue, just because of the amount that I've been exposed to them. I mean, obviously the Interfaith Community has played a huge role in getting me more comfortable with them, but also the Interfaith Community, one of the great things about it is we have our own services, and we're in our own little safe space, and all the services, no matter whether it's for a Jewish holiday or a Christian holiday, they always touch on both, and I'm very accustomed to that. And also I never really had friends who had bar mitzvahs or confirmations, I'm sure Phoebe and Dan might have more experience just going to temple every weekend for a bat mitzvah.
I only went to 2.
Oh, I don't know.
I went to 1 million, yeah.
Yeah, but that being said, I still feel like I'm definitely much more comfortable, and I feel like I'm more comfortable than some of my other friends and people that I know. I know I can go, and I know what's going on, even if I'm not 100% comfortable in the environment, just because. And also I'm sure whether I went to the Interfaith Community or not, I would never be super religious about one or the other anyway. So I just at least feel comfortable, and I know what's going on, and I kind of know what the Lord's Prayer is. I know the Shema, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I feel connected in some way.
And does either of you think that now that you're going off to college, and your parents and I will not be saying so, coming here for this holiday, right, that you will do any exploration, that you have any thoughts about whether religion might play any kind of role?
I have a feeling that I'll just, when my mom mentions that Yom Kippur service is this weekend, I'll say, oh, okay, great, I don't have class that day, I'll come back. I have a feeling that if there is a service, I will probably fight my way to get here. Just because, I mean, as Zoe said, it feels good to come to a service and you're not actually in a church or in a synagogue, but you're in your kind of own little non-denominational safe place at the same time with religious meaning. So you kind of have your own little cubby hole of religious.
That's very affirming for us. But when you are at school and there is, let's say, a Kol Nidre service, and your friends say we're going, do you think that you might go?
I mean, I'm open to anything. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the only deciding factor on it would be if I had a test. Other than that, I would probably go. I'd much rather do that than go to a kegger. Quite honestly.
Zoe, anything?
I think that, I guess kind of along the same lines as Phoebe, I think I want to at least, I want to try. I want to make an effort to go to services when there are ones, not every week or anything, but for the high holy holidays, for Christmas, and just, I want to continue to be a part of both religions and stay in touch with both of them, because I don't think I've made a decision with either one, and obviously I haven't committed to either one, but I also haven't decided that I want to like detach myself from either of them either. And I still think it's just also a part of my culture. It's what I grew up with. I grew up with all the Jewish holidays. I celebrated them in some way, shape, or form. I celebrated the Christian holidays. So I think that I want to continue to have at least a little bit of a connection.
I'm going to just take it down to even like a bit of a smaller level, a more like a person-to-person level. So often religion is a polarizing force that I guess can, I mean, if you look at the news, I guess, most days.
Politics.
Yeah. Yeah, even just in politics, actually, even when we're talking about the presidential election. Religion is so often a polarizing force that sets people against one another, but what the Interfaith Community has done for me is it's really made it more of a bridge, so that, for example, when I meet somebody, I can say, oh, well, like, now we have something in common, and it's given me more than that, because, you know, now there's Judaism and Christianity, and then I have grounding in other religions as well. So the thing is, it's just building off of this idea that we're all the same. I mean, when it comes right down to it, and so I think that would just make it easier for me to connect with people, and that's really something that, you know, meeting new people, I mean, that's something that comes up, and I'm so glad that, you know, I have the grounding to be able to relate to many more people, I think, because of these classes.
Very interesting. Michael, Phoebe's father, Marianne, Daniel's mother, are there any questions or comments you'd like to make?
I wanted to make a comment in answer to your first question about being comfortable and, you know, did it make them comfortable? And I just wanted to share this experience. Daniel, when he had his bar mitzvah, he was, you know, had his bar mitzvah on Saturday. My father actually died on Sunday. And then Daniel, you know, was a pallbearer for my father on Tuesday. And I would say that it was seamless. You know, he was on the bima on Saturday with, you know, his cousins, you know, who are Catholic and Puerto Rican and French and everything. And then he was in church on Tuesday, you know, as a pallbearer for my father. And, you know, I'm pretty sure I can speak for him and say, you know, I don't think even in those, having had just been, you know, having had his bar mitzvah, he didn't feel like alienated at all when he walked into the church, you know, 3 days later.
I'll second that. I mean, yeah, I do feel very connected to my Irish Catholic heritage. I mean, I really do. It's not, I'm not just saying that. I used to feel more disconnected because it was this other thing that I was not a part of, and me and my dad would sit when people went up for communion. That's a big thing that we've been touching on, but that really went away. It really did. So, thanks to you guys.
Michael, anything? No pressure.
Just a sort of a general comment. You know, we didn't want the kids to learn their religion on the street.
That's a great line.
when the classes started, one of the things that they did was they created these books that they worked on all through the classes until the end, and they came home and they were beautifully bound and decorated, and they had like little bits of everything that they learned in them. So they got a lot of, you know, there's a lot of religion to throw at people out there, and they sort of like took what they wanted and put it in the book. And we still have books that are on the bookcase. And we talk about the things that they learned in the classes. Good Samaritan is like constantly discussed by Charlie as well as Phoebe. And no, it was just good. They got to sort of absorb what they wanted and learn about the rest. And, you know, it was a cultural thing. And it was like a security thing. And it worked out really well. That's it.
Great. Gina and Nakama, before we open it up.
Yeah, I know, because I'm older now.
But not twice as old as she is now, right?
It's just not just me.
It's really, also my training as an anthropologist and my specialty in ritual, and having this background, an academic background coming into this, an artistic background coming into this, and then finally just this personal experience for myself of realizing that you seed the soil, and everybody grows their own garden, but that these things, you guys are about to enter in a stage in the life cycle where there's a lot of shifting around and looking and exploring, and it's great, it's absolutely wonderful, wide open to brand new things. And then you get a little farther down the life cycle and you have this place to come back to in a new way, and you get to activate that with families if you go on and have families, or you have circles of friendships that you create familial bonds out of, and you're sharing this, and it all accumulates. So you get more out of this as you get older. It's going to become even more now than it is where you're standing now, and it's pretty wonderful. It's pretty wonderful that you've got, you're just like blasted it out of the park.
Sounds like a blessing and not a question. Nakama, anything you want to say?
Mine's another question.
Oh,
so,
good.
Yay. One of the things that, I don't remember who said it, but somebody's parent, I think it was Stacy, saying that a lot of kids in New York sort of grow up in a gray area of nothing. And like we know from our work in the interfaith community that we have all of Manhattan. There's like a 60%, something like that, intermarriage rate between Jews and Christians. And like there, or at least in the Jewish community, 60% of Jews marry, it's not 60% of Christians marry Jews. There aren't enough Jews for that. But I realized that statistic didn't work both ways halfway through. So, and like we're not flooded through the door with like more and more kids every day to be part of the community, and we often like wonder why, and I think that that's an interesting philosophical question. But in terms of like where you guys have been on your journey since you were 9, do you encounter a lot of other kids who grew up with one Jewish parent and one Christian parent? And like, what have they done? And what has your experience been of meeting other kids who are in a way like you, but not like you, because they're having very different experiences? And can you share any of what some other kids are out there doing and how you've related to them?
I'd say a lot of the kids I've met who are interfaith kids, they don't really even consider it, which is something that I think is a little bit sad, because it was so great for me to be able to choose. I mean, the idea of a choice, when you think about all of these kids who were thrust into Hebrew school and Sunday school they have no choice in the matter, before they even know what they're doing, then it just becomes a chore, you know? But being in this class with you guys, it was, here's the information and do what you will with it. It's like you lay it out on the table for us and then say, now you do what you want. And the choice was always there to say, I don't want to do anything with it. But I think what's going on with a lot of these kids is I don't think they're really interested. And I think the idea is like, well, I don't believe, so I'm just like, I don't believe in any of this, so I'm just not going to even investigate it. And I think that's really sad, because a large part of what I took away from this is the cultural aspect and the tradition and the history, and I think that's really important, just in terms of, finding out who you are and who were your ancestors and where were they from and what did they believe, and I think that's really important, to have a grounding in your own history, and I think a lot of people just don't pay much attention to that now. I think it's become like religion is just the only interaction you can have with religion is if you believe, and if you're a believer, and if not, then why would you ever even broach the subject? And I think that I hope that changes.
I agree. I think that, all the people I've met have either chosen one religion very, very, very young, probably the decision of their parents, or they just totally negate the whole thing and decide not to have any religion at all, opting to have religion when it's convenient, like when it's time for Christmas or Hanukkah, and then that's it. And I agree. I think it's sad not to even try to invest in people I mean, your ancestors were clearly Jewish and Christian, and you should try to at least investigate your past, like the people of your past. And I'm glad that I got to have that chance, that I got to have the, you know, gentle coaxing as opposed to the pushing into one religion or the other, and that we didn't as much discuss one religion as compared to the other, but we discussed both equally and how they related to one another and how we felt about each religion. And I know I feel sad for people who, I mean, they think that because they don't believe in anything, they just don't want to do anything. And I feel like it's a little ignorant because, you know, they're so uneducated when they have all this information at their fingertips now that they could use.
Yeah, and I think that most people that I meet who, like, I find a lot of people who, I mean, like, if we're having a general discussion, like, oh, what religion are you? A lot of people will identify as atheist, and a lot of the kids who identify as atheist are kids who have one parent who's Jewish and one parent who's Christian or some other mix, usually Jewish and Christian. And I think that there was a better point about that. And I think, I totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. And
the word atheist threw you off. The word atheist threw you off.
Yeah, it did. So I think that because they don't really have the space to learn about both, and they don't know about both. And I think also, especially in New York, it's much easier to be a cultural Jew than it is to be a cultural Christian. Especially because I think there's a lot of stigma about Christian culture, and there's only like two major holidays. And you know, in New York, you have like the bagels and lox and
Carnegie Deli.
And basically saying that also a lot of people will just identify more with the Jewish side, just more organically because of the amount of traditions that there are. And also I think a lot of people don't really understand that the two religions can coexist, because I think most people, if they have parents of both faiths, it's really more just been ignored than actually trying to like be raised in both. And yeah, they celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, but not really very much beyond that.
I just want to end that really quickly with, there's, just so that you know, the concept of saying that you believe in, that you're culturally Christian, or like talking about Christian culture, is ultra sophisticated concept. Like, most people do not see Christianity as a culture altogether, like that it's solely a religion, which is why they're either in it completely or they're out of it completely. And that we have like Christmas and Easter that are commercialized, but the idea of like really seeing deep culture as something that you could get from Christianity, I think is something that has been like a real gift to some of the educators that you guys have had at this program, to be able to conceptualize in that way, I think is really sophisticated.
Okay, everybody, Jackie.
Hi. Thank you guys for making the time tonight to come talk to us. I have 3 children, 2 are in the program and have been, and so it's really great to hear you talk. My question is, along the way, you're talking now, you sort of all have said that you appreciate not having a choice. You seem to be very comfortable with where you are right now in your journey. If you had to look back in the last 9 years, is there a time when maybe you had a friend that was very Jewish or very Christian, and that you sort of participated in their family ceremonies or traditions, and you wanted to go one than the other? And if that influenced you in any way, and how did you find your way back to this wonderful middle ground where you're open to both?
Well, I guess I can kind of speak to that, because 2 of my best friends are very, very strongly religious, Jewish, and I don't have any friends who are Christian, or like who are very like strong Christians who go to church every Sunday, versus I have friends and you can't do anything with them Saturday, nothing Friday night. And I think just in being around them, and like I joined the Jewish Cultural Club like because they were there. I mean, I probably wouldn't have joined it if they weren't. And in that way, I mean, especially I think when I was younger, like 8th, 9th grade, I wanted I think I was more inclined to want to lean more towards Judaism just because that's where my friends were, and it seemed like very clear, and I was like, oh, I could do the Judaism thing, and like I didn't really have like as much of like Christian like friends who were like telling me about how they went to church every Sunday. So I think in that way, but in
Find your way back to like a way,
Yeah.
that's kind of away from that in a way, because you could have very easily.
I could have. I think in a way, I think it was really the interfaith community and like going to both services and like still going to Christmas and also remembering back to the classes and like thinking about how I didn't have to pick one. I could still be Jewish. I could be Jewish. I could believe in it, but I didn't have to choose. And also just realizing that also my friends were very Jewish. Also, it was their families, and they had a very, very strong background in it, and like that's what they were raised with every single day. And it was much more, I realized it was much more of like a fad kind of thing for me just because my friends were doing it. But also, one of the things I really have appreciated about the Interfaith community is I have friends here. Like, I've made like some like really, really great friends, and that's also one of the things that probably helped. And I think it was good that we all, like speaking, I guess also about that, is that we all had something that tied us together to start with, and the classes, as we said, were very fun. The arts and crafts and like grape juice and going to bar mitzvahs with 3 Sams. I remember something about grape juice. I don't know.
At least 2 of my 3.
That's right. Yeah.
Because I did that together.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say I actually never had that compulsion. Like I never wanted more, because the thing that I see with a lot of my friends who are deeply religious, for the most part, it is I'd say like modern Orthodox Jews. I have a few friends who are modern Orthodox in my school, and the problem with the way that they were raised, that I see at least, is that there was really never a decision on their part. Like you said earlier, it seems like you guys were happy because you didn't have to choose. Well, I would just tweak that slightly, because we made a choice like not to necessarily go one way, and that's like, I know that's like semantics, but like that's just the way that I look at it. And so with these people, they were brought up and they were, as I said before, like thrust into these religious schools and you know, basically instructed to believe certain things, and whereas we were given the information and the materials, but then allowed to make our own decisions. So I had religion in my life to the extent that I wanted it, and so I was always very happy with the extent to which I was religious, and that was my own choice. You know, if it was, for somebody else, they could have looked at this and said, yeah, I want more. You know, but that would have been, that was open to me. I'm sure my father would have, and my parents would have been all right with that.
I think I have both sides of the spectrum. I have one of my very best friends is I think she's Episcopalian, and as a little kid she would go to church every Sunday with her mom. She participated in Sunday school. She is now in, I guess, a youth group, but as she grew older, she went to church a little less and less because she was, getting more of her independence and kind of starting to be able to make her own decisions about things. And she told me once that I think around this year, she's been very busy with college and everything, and she hasn't really had time to participate in church as much as she used to when she was maybe a child and when she was a preteen. And she told her mother that, she hasn't really felt very close to God lately, and her mother said, that is the devil talking in your voice. And I kind of was very taken aback. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I had a friend who was very Jewish and would participate in Shabbat every Friday night and Saturday, and she had a bat mitzvah, and the whole thing. But as she grew older, again, she, after, not having to go to Hebrew school anymore and having the bat mitzvah and everything behind her, she pulled away from her religion. And she also got her belly button pierced, which I'm not sure if you're allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you get something pierced. I don't know. I know tattoos are not nice, but...
Tattoos are not kosher, is that?
Yeah, I don't think tattoos are kosher. But I remember thinking that it was very similar how they were both very, cemented in their religion. So when they were older and they started gaining independence, they moved away from it, as opposed to we kind of had our independence already. Because you gave us our independence, and you guys had no problem with us being independent and thinking what we wanted to think, and only slightly nudging us. And now that we're older, we still clearly are attached to our religious beliefs and our spiritual beliefs. And I think that when we become older, we become closer to it, as opposed to being farther away from it as we gain our independence. And when you have it there already, I think that it's a much better way to see life and religion.
And I guess also building on listening to Dan and Phoebe speak, I realized that one of the biggest differences with my friends that are Jewish is that as they grew older and gained their independence, they started believing in their religions even more. And like one of my friends now, she says that she's one of the only people under the age of 30 who goes to Friday services. And I realized that one of the things that enticed me a lot about my friends was that they seemed like they had something that had really, really grounded them, and they had like this very, very strong community. And one of my friends, would go to like these Jewish youth conventions like every weekend, and that was something that I really liked and that I really connected to. And I guess that's one of the things that I kind of just wish that there were more people and there were more like teens and stuff that I just identified as interfaith, because I think like we could have like just as strong a community, and I've definitely found a community at Interfaith, even though it's very small. And I think that that's also what made me stay, was just realizing that yes, theirs might be bigger, but mine is like, I have just as strong a connection, like just as much of a family here.
What I'd like to do is, how many people have questions? Could just 1, 2, 3? I'd like to hear the questions because I don't want to lose any good questions, and then we can try to facilitate the conversation around those questions. So Amy, start with your question. I'm going to write it down.
Question. We could be here all night on my questions, but since you're keeping a list, could I give you many questions?
Sure.
Keep track. Some are actually for the parents as well, and then maybe I could get back to the kids. But I do have a question as the parent, as a couple who decided to raise their children interfaith. You obviously have a strong sense, each has a sense of their own religion. So, and being respectful of not wanting to give up your religion, you can't really ask someone else to give up their religion. So I feel that raising your children interfaith is always a little bit of a compromise. So my question is, do you feel that it's always a compromise, and now you see like these 3 remarkable children of whom I'm sure you're all inordinately proud, as I would be if my kids grow up, to have such a sense of self and identity, but do you also feel a little bit of a feeling of loss because you're not raising your child in kind of the religious and cultural belief that really was important to you and is part of your sense of identity? And how do you deal with some of the unfamiliarity of the other religion and the times where there's a little bit of maybe uncomfortableness, I don't know if that's quite a word, where your children are experiencing things that are very foreign to you? For instance, my older son, who's now 7.5, has been doing, this is his 2nd year of the class, and Sheila knows this story. It was very, I wouldn't say difficult, but the first time I saw him come home with his St. Thomas of Aquinas button, or the day that they did the holiday celebration, he happened to he was All Saints Day, and he came marching out of a room with a giant cross on him. And I was raised a conservative Jew who went to Hebrew school 3 days a week, pretty much my entire life, from when I was 6 till bat mitzvah and then Hebrew high school. So that was hard for me, and I love my husband, and he's Presbyterian, but that's difficult to have your child say, well, I believe in Jesus and I believe in Christ, and you want to be super supportive, but sometimes you can't even answer their questions. And then are you prepared if your children ultimately decide to choose the religion that isn't your religion? You guys have touched on this a little bit, the differences between wishing maybe you were one religion or told what you are. And I understand your concept, I think, is interesting about that if you're told this is your religion, then your only choice is to either reject it or continue
And a
on
lot
that
of times
path.
you can't even reject it. That's the thing. It's like
As opposed
you're
to
doing what your
choosing,
parents say.
but,
Yeah.
I also have a question from the Judaism part, and this is something I've been very conflicted with, because I'm searching for a way to have the Jewish part of my family be very accepting, or the path that we choose in Judaism for my family to be very accepting, and I find conservative Judaism is not necessarily so accepting, so therefore I feel that not only am I compromising, I'm now compromising the Judaism that I love to be able to maybe have to choose a reform path of Judaism, which is be more accepting for my whole family and will be more palatable for my husband, who's not Jewish and doesn't speak Hebrew, you know, to deal with the services and the culture. So that's something I find interesting. Why don't I let other people have some chances?
I've got all these questions. Other people, Sarah.
Larry touched on it, I think, in some of her questions, but I guess from the other side, with everyone coming from their own perspective, I guess I was wondering how, first of all, I guess like you talked about a lot of the commonalities from being, I'm Episcopalian, and I feel like a lot of the commonalities are essentially Judaism, ex-Hebrew. So how do you like balance, how does, I guess, Christianity get shared without being, I guess the question was how much does it actually get shared, which seems like it does. And then without saying this, I feel like both parents might say, oh, Moses is true, and the Old Testament is true, and that all is real, but like, you know, the New Testament, this is what Christians believe. So like, how do you balance like kind of being like very inclusive on one side versus almost no, even the Christian parent feeling afraid to kind of like reinforce what they believe so as not to be preaching. I guess that was like, I probably didn't state that well, but how does that like?
Yeah, that's hard. Other question? Come on, I saw some other hands.
Can I add one more?
Sure.
So if you guys now
Laura, I thought
are
you were
raised
gonna-
interfaith, and I know it's a different stage of your life, but now you've definitely got a distinct part of your culture that is Jewish and a distinct part of your culture and heritage that's Christian. You have to now decide how you're going to raise your children. So do you continue this interfaith thing, and now your children and their children's children and everyone's now interfaith, or do you think the person who you marry may influence, or whether you marry or not, whoever may be the, you know, the father or mother of your child might influence that? But I do understand that it makes you more open to all religions. I mean, a lot of us could have kids that come home and say, I'm Buddhist, or I'm, you know, Hindu, or I'm this or that. I mean, people do explore religion, and because we're in New York and because all of us are interfaith, I think we're much more tolerant and open towards all religious explorations. But that's
a great
another question.
A great question. Laura, it's Alan, Scott, and Emily. Any questions from you?
I think we're more just observing. We're so new.
You're what? You're keeping them. Okay. Any other? Okay, go for it.
It's just for the two. I was just curious because you don't. It's a personal question, so you don't have to answer it. But I know that you said that you don't believe in God. I'm wondering if the two of you like have any like decisions on that, or you just are open to it.
Yeah, let's hold that question too. That's a big one. Yeah. Any other questions? Let's find out. Yeah, I'd like to focus initially on the questions that the kids can answer themselves. And I'd like to take Amy's last question and rephrase it for the way my kids answered when they were 9 years old, which is, well, Mommy, if I were to marry someone who was Jewish, then I'd have to become wholly Christian to keep the balance. And I don't think that's what they would say now. But
I did think that when I was little.
Yeah, me too. So that, can you imagine, do you think, your parents may want to leave the room now, but that you will be maybe looking for a life partner, and that partner may have a religious tradition or maybe not, and how would that appeal to you or not if you were dating somebody seriously, and can you imagine what would you do with your religious tradition, right?
Well, knock on wood, this is real, right? That I'm not having kids for quite some time. But when and if I do, and when and if I get married, I think that first of all, I mean, I never really pictured getting married in a church or a synagogue in the first place. I'd probably, like most teenage girls, I would get married on a cliff where the sunset would be coming down and Stevie Wonder would be singing.
That's a good choice. If he's alive,
It's
also,
a
that's
very cheap wedding. But I think that when and if I get married or, you know, choose a life partner, that their religion, unless they were very, very set in their ways, would not be a deciding factor for me. And if we ever had kids, then, I mean, would I choose to want to raise them interfaith? Absolutely. But, I mean, then again, I mean, I can't really say just because I don't know if I'm ever going to get married or who I'm going to marry. So the answer may change, but I have a feeling that being a very stubborn person, I'd be very set in raising them interfaith.
I mean, I think that I've actually thought about this question a lot, which might be weird, but like, I mean, just like in terms of like not like getting married or having children, but like what I'm gonna be in the future, and like when I leave home when I'm not in this space, because obviously the interfaith community is for a place for families where one parent is Jewish and one parent is Christian, and they're trying to make both of these religions like work together, and it's about finding like a compromise and a middle ground. And so, well, I've always thought about the possibility that there's a very, just based on the way the world is working right now, there's a very large possibility that I'm going to marry someone else who's interfaith, just because, and whether they were like raised interfaith, or just have one parent of one religion, one parent of the other. And then I started thinking about, well, if I marry someone who's interfaith, would we both raise our kids interfaith? Like, I don't know. Or like if I marry someone who's Jewish or Christian, would I take the other side? But I feel like that's really hard to say, because also one of the things that I appreciate the interfaith community is that it's given me a grounding in both religions, and it's given me a platform on which to choose. But then I start thinking about there's so many other religions, like it doesn't have to be just Judaism or Christianity. And then I feel like I almost want to like enroll my child in like a general like religions of the world studies class, because like I was only exposed to two, but who knows, like I could have like taken a class on like Buddhism and decided that that was the path that I wanted to take. Like I just don't know. So I don't know.
I agree with Zoe in what she was saying about how, you know, yes, we became very familiar with two religions, but, you know, there are so many in the world, and how do you, like, distinguish, like, which ones to introduce your child to in order to, you know, give them an option? And I think that the important part is really to, you know, I think that there should be some general education on world religions. I feel like that's kind of like the next step is making that it really, in my opinion, it should be an option for the child. And so, like, I think you provide as much information as you can, and then let the child make his or her own decision. But I mean, I was just actually thinking about, but like, for example, what if I were to marry a nice Jewish girl? What if I were to marry a Jewish girl? Like, what would I like?
As opposed to a nice one.
Yeah. And I was thinking, well, I think that I would probably raise my child Jewish, because that's how I identify. I was bar mitzvah. I consider myself a Jew. And I was thinking, well, I would probably raise my child Jewish. And then I was thinking, but then, you know, that's, you know, once again, kind of going against everything I said. And so I guess I think what's important to really instill in your children is to always question, and not just be a blind like to really go against like blind faith. I think it's really important to always question what you're told, and I think that's an important part of being a good member of any religion, is to be like an active participant, and to say, like, well, what is this that I'm being told, and does this make sense to me, and do I believe this, and why? And so I think a lot of people kind of just accept things at face value when it comes to religion, because that's what they're told, and I think that's not the best way to go about it. I think that it's much more important to challenge and to challenge things. And I don't think that makes you any less Jewish or any less Christian. I think that makes you more so, even, just because you're actually taking a part in, like, intellectually, you're taking a part in what you're learning in your own education. And so you know, there are these different thoughts that I'm having about, like, how far to go in terms of, like, general, like, world knowledge on different religions and what to present my kids, I guess we're gonna call them my kids.
Air quotes.
And you know, I think basically what I'm saying is, I've said a lot of things. What I'm saying is I think it's most important to not raise your child in any religion specifically. I think you present your child with information, and teach them, and try to open their eyes to what's out there, and then, you know, let them make their own decision. Hopefully that would be, but always question. That's, you know.
Yeah. I just want to add, when you said, you know, a good philosophy is to question what you've been told. The funny thing is that I wholeheartedly agree with that, and at the same time, in the classes, it was very hard to question what we were told when we weren't told anything, which was the great part. We were asked instead of being told, so it was very hard to question what we were being told when technically we were being asked and we were telling ourselves. So, another thing what I thought was so great about the classes, and whenever I would think about the classes now as an 18-year-old, I always remember my favorite part would be just discussing, you know, our families and how we acted in Gina's house, and, like, drinking tea and sitting on couches. And it was, I mean, that was really awesome. Just in thinking of ways to, you know, change the words to Jeremiah as a bullfrog. And it was, yeah, vaguely. Actually, I know all the words. But, I mean, I really liked that, again, we were not exactly always learning in a church. We were learning in your house, too. And it was, even then, your house is very much of a sacred place because it's such a nice house. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed that.
Can I just jump in really quickly and say one more thing? Is that the way you're raising, talking about raising a child, I mean, I have, like, literally no experience with this, so this is just all speculation on my part.
I think that's a little bit of a relief.
Yeah. But when we're talking about, like, raising kids, I guess raising children in a religious sense is kind of, like, tied as well to just, like, raising a child. Like, you're raising the person that you're putting out into the world. So like, it's all part of, it's not like, you know, you can compartmentalize it and, like, here's how I raise the child in terms of religion, here's how I raise them in terms of this. But the thing I was saying about questioning, I think, is a good thing, like, just in general, like, to question all things, because you know, people are going to take what they learn from religion, what they learn in every sector, and, like, apply it to different aspects of their life. And that's something that's really important, is to, like, raise somebody who's not gonna, like, who's not just gonna, you know, basically somebody who questions and who makes up their own mind about things, and is not like, isn't just like fed things that they then believe. So I'm just saying, like, that also applies in, like, tons of different areas, I believe. So so the way that you raise your child in terms of religion also has an effect on who that person is, but, like, in a secular world. So, you know, that is
and also Phoebe said, and she mentioned that, she said that we weren't necessarily, like, we couldn't really question what we were told because we weren't told anything. But I think the more, I guess, semantics, but I think it's not really to question what you're told, but just to more generally ask questions. And I think that that's more of what needs to be fostered, because, like, we still, like, asked questions about the stories, and we asked questions about what we were learning, and we tried to understand it better, and we were allowed to ask those sort of questions, and, like, yeah, so that's more.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I hear in, just reflecting this back, because I think it touches on some of the questions that came up too, what I hear in what all of you are saying is that what your upbringing has given you is a sense of confidence in being a person who can be active in a religious environment. And that, like, I think what I hear from people who are coming to the interfaith community before they had kids or who had young kids is that I feel like I, being the person coming to the interfaith community, don't have enough background in my own religion to be able to impart anything of value to my children, and that I just don't have enough to be able to give them, so I need to make sure I find this or that or another thing, and I feel underconfident in being able to raise my children with any kind of religious, or I don't know enough about Judaism to give my kids a good Jewish education. And I think that what you guys are saying, which comes back to a piece I mentioned before, which I think is key, is that it's quality, not quantity. And that there's the quality that you guys have of this confidence in being people who are in an in-between place, and your comfort with doing that, and you're grappling between, like, even if, like, when Daniel's talking about sitting more in a Jewish place and less in a Christian place, but also feeling like just raising kids purely Jewish would cut down the education that he got, because there was something beyond just learning about both Judaism and Christianity, but it was about learning about religion and being educated about religion and about how religions function. Like that these kids have gotten a gloss of, like, the understanding of how faith functions in the world, that I think most kids with your average Hebrew school, Sunday school education, they just miss that, because people are focused on quantity and on content and on giving you the most amount that they can of this stuff to put in your head, and they forget to teach you about how faith functions. And, like, we had to distill things in a different way, and it comes across when you hear the kids talk about the way that they learned and the way that they become.
You did a good job.
Yeah.
I think it's always important also to have a purpose in the religious education that you're giving your child. It's not just because, like, well, you were raised a certain way and then I feel like I should do this because it was done for me. But it's like religion is a way of making yourself a better person, a better part of society, and, you know, maybe creating a community for yourself. So, you know, just I'd say in terms of raising your kids in a religious sense, just never lose sight of what the aspects are in the secular world that it relates to. Like, you know, just always have, like, a purpose. Like, why? So why do we do this? Well, you know, related to something outside of religion as well, so that it's not just, like, you know, so that it has purpose as well. I don't know.
Daniel and Zoe and Phoebe are giving you their views. There are 3 of the children who have gone through our program, and you can see where they are at age 18. You're all 18, I assume?
Yeah, just turned.
Yes, happy birthday, happy birthday. And the fact that we think, and I think that they've said that they have enough grounding in each tradition to make a journey if they choose to, and Daniel has. And they have, but they have not been deeply grounded, but Nakama would argue that they have been perhaps better grounded in a number of ways than some children who have felt forced to participate in one way or other. And I think that all the kids are sort of suggesting back to you, when you talk about raising a child, what is your philosophy of raising the child? Are you raising the child to be a certain way, or to be the way you think you were, or are you raising a child for another purpose? And these are very complicated and subtle questions that parents deal with all the time in terms of where religion and religious education comes to bear in your philosophy of parenting. I want to defer Amy's questions to some informal conversation afterward, because they're really more to the parents than to the kids, and Sarah's as well. Alan, Scott asked a question that I think would be interesting to pull toward as we conclude this conversation, because I do remember that actually I thought when Stacy Fleischer, Zoe's mother, first decided to participate in this, she talked about the importance for her and her husband of the possibility that one of their children might be deeply spiritual, and that neither she nor her husband were particularly that. And they wanted to find a support for a child who had a deep sense of spiritual need, to find a way to explore that, in addition to the religious traditions so far. And then you've asked the question of, well, you know, do you believe in God? And where is this in your spiritual journey as well? And it's a kind of a personal question. You may not want to answer it, but if you want to say anything about your sense of a spiritual journey, this could be a good time, very briefly.
Well, I always believed in God, personally, and I don't think any other kind of influence has changed that belief or modified it in any way. I've always believed in God, and I watch my little brother now find his own kind of personal belief as he constantly tells me, as he constantly tells my grandmother, just to see the reaction. He says that he believes in a higher power, but he doesn't necessarily believe in God. And I always look at him funny before, just shaking my head and, you know, letting him do his thing. But I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I always believed in God. My mom always talks about when I think I was really little, 6 or 7 or something, and I had a Jewish babysitter. And you remember the story, right, Mommy? And she was going to put me to bed, and I said my prayers, and I asked her if she believed in God, and she said no. And I asked why, and she said because, you know, years ago there was this evil, this is my education of the Holocaust at 6 years old. She said there was this evil man named Hitler who killed a lot of Jews because he didn't like them. And I don't think that if there was a God that would have happened. I think that it was too cruel and that God would not have stand by and let them watch. And I said, well, was it like a war? And she said, yes. And I asked, well, did Hitler die? And she said, yes, he killed himself at the end. He died. He got what he deserved. And I said, well, and there are Jews still living, right? I mean, there's my dad and there's you and there's lots of other people who are Jewish and they lived on. And she said yes. And I said, well, the war ended, didn't it? And she said yes. And I asked her if because the war ended and that the Jews continued to live on and that, you know, the fight was won, that isn't there a God after all if the fight didn't continue for the rest of our lives? And I mean, I don't remember what happened after that. I think I fell asleep. But she, I think she kind of just looked at me like, wow. And went to bed, and I guess she told my parents, because I don't think that they recorded the conversation while I was in bed while they were outside.
But now it is recorded.
And now, yes, that's true.
That's wonderful. Do either Zoe or Daniel have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of opposite from maybe I don't really believe in God. Like, I never really have. I mean, I believe in some sort of vague higher power, fate, kind of like Charlie.
As we do sometimes think like Charlie.
Yeah, but I think that part of that has come out of the fact that I've been educated in both and I know about both, and I was able to make that choice and say, no, I really don't think God as it is in the Bible or the Torah is a thing. Like, I don't necessarily like believe in either one. And also kind of another thing, that having an interfaith education, like when I was growing up, one of the things it did was I remember constantly like thinking to myself and asking the question, I still think about this, is like, what's the difference? And that sounds like such a weird question, but it's true, because I remember learning at both of them, and to me, they sounded so similar, like with the exception of Jesus. Like they were all both built on the Old Testament. They both had the same morals, the same values. They wanted you to do the same things, and the whole idea was like being a good person. And that's kind of what the biggest thing that I took away from both religions was the idea that it wasn't all about God. It wasn't all about Jesus. It was about being a good person and about helping others, and so to me, like, Jesus kind of seemed arbitrary. I'm not saying that like everyone thinks that, and I'm not saying that I'm not discrediting Christianity at all for that. Just I think that when I was forming my own identity, I was able to see how well the religions meshed together, so I didn't need to take the God part or like this necessarily spiritual part out of them, and that's not what I used, what I relied on them for.
Daniel,
yeah, I mean, you heard my opinion on it. I really can't remember a time where I did believe in God. I don't know. Do you guys have any? Did you have any conversations with me when I was younger that I don't know about?
Yeah.
Can't remember.
No. I mean, since you've been talking about it, your question.
Yeah, I can't remember a time when I did, but that's partly a function of the fact that I'm a fairly cynical person, and it's partly just because that's how I don't know, that's how I turned out. That's just my belief. I mean, I don't think there's ever been any like fluctuation there. So, I mean, yeah, that's it. I mean, it was the same when I became bar mitzvah.
or as a...
And I didn't feel like any less of a Jew. I mean, I know that sounds a little crazy, but I think it allowed me to appreciate other aspects of the religion even more, and really examine why I wanted to become bar mitzvah. So.
With that, I think we need to draw this to a close for all kinds of reasons.
Can I say one more thing?
Okay, one more thing.
Just I don't know if there are any couples in the room, pairs of parents or anything. I know you're a parent. I mean, if you're scared about, maybe how your kids will turn out or how the whole thing will be, this is the end result so far.
So be very, very...
The red hair wasn't influenced by. I think that, your kids look to you to find out, what's going on and if is this okay, and as long as you kind of say this is okay, go along and do what you want. I think that anyone who has kids and want to raise them interfaith or is thinking about it or thinking about having kids and doing that, as long as you encourage them to find their own sense of self, they'll figure it out like we did.
Well, I guess that Phoebe is asking for last words for each of our panelists.
Oh, sorry.
And if you have last words, this is the moment. Zoe, any last words?
I'm trying to think.
Don't have to.
Yeah. I guess just like being interfaith isn't a bad thing. I think that I've definitely grown from it, and I really appreciate the experience, and I appreciate that my parents and my mom didn't want me to be raised in that gray area, because I do see a lot of kids that are in that gray area, and I know that I say I don't necessarily believe in it, but I appreciate that I had the choice to say that I don't believe in it. And especially growing up in New York, I think it's really hard because we're a very liberal city, and I think a lot of people like shy away from religion just because they think you have to be like super part of it, and it's just like we're very, very cynical people.
We think the opposite of religion is logic.
Yeah, basically.
Which isn't true.
Which isn't really true. So I think that I've appreciated knowing the opposite of religion isn't logic, and that I can make the choice for myself after like really getting the education and really making that choice for myself.
I guess my last words would be that, you're not raising the child, you're raising the person that they're going to be. And I think the best way to do that in terms of your child's religious identity, that person's religious identity, is kind of the same way that you raise, you try to raise an intelligent and good child, and good person. You just raise them with an intellectual curiosity and intellectual hunger, hopefully and hopefully they can do the rest on their own. You present them with information, and they'll figure it out. But that's really big. And intellectual curiosity is what got us all to the place that we're at. So, and that's, you know, largely due to these guys. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you all very much.